The death certificate was signed at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in the emergency room of St. Catherine's Hospital by Dr. Margaret Holloway, a physician with 19 years of experience who had pronounced more patients dead than she cared to remember. The woman on the table had been brought in after a severe car accident on the outskirts of town. Her vehicle wrapped around a concrete barrier with such force that the engine had been pushed into the front seats. There was no pulse when the paramedics arrived. There was no brain activity when she reached the hospital. There was no heartbeat, no respiration, no electrical activity of any kind. Dr. Holloway documented massive internal trauma, irreparable organ damage, and injuries incompatible with life. She signed the certificate, noted the time, and moved on to the next patient, because Tuesday nights were always busy, and death does not wait for grief to catch up. 17 minutes later, a trucker named Dale Hendricks called 911 to report that a woman matching the exact description of the deceased was walking barefoot along the shoulder of Highway 57, approximately 3 miles from the crash site, heading in the direction of town. Her name was Vanessa Cole, and she had been driving home from her sister's house when she lost control of her vehicle on a curve that locals called Dead Man's Bend, a name that suddenly seemed far more literal than anyone had ever intended. She was 36 years old, a kindergarten teacher at Riverside Elementary, married to a man named Thomas, who was still at home watching television when his wife's body was being zipped into a bag at the county morgue. The hospital had not yet made the notification call. Thomas Cole did not know he was a widower. He would not find out for another 2 hours, and by then the situation would become so complicated that the authorities genuinely did not know what to tell him. Dale Hendricks had been driving trucks for 23 years and had seen plenty of strange things on the highways at night. He had seen deer standing frozen in his headlights, like statues carved from fear. He had seen hitchhikers who disappeared when he looked in his mirrors. He had seen accidents so terrible that the images still visited him in his dreams. But he had never seen anything like the woman walking along Highway 57 at 12 minutes past midnight, her hospital gown flapping in the wind created by passing vehicles, her feet bare and bleeding on the rough asphalt, her arms hanging limply at her sides as if she had forgotten what arms were supposed to do. Dale slowed his rig and pulled onto the shoulder ahead of her, thinking she was an escaped patient from somewhere, maybe someone in the middle of a mental health crisis who needed assistance. He climbed down from his cab and walked toward her, calling out to ask if she was all right. The woman did not respond. She continued walking forward with that same mechanical pace, her eyes fixed on something in the distance that Dale could not see. When he got close enough to really look at her face, he felt his stomach drop into his boots. Her skin was gray, not the gray of someone who was cold, but the gray of someone whose blood had stopped circulating entirely. Her lips were blue-white and slightly parted. Her eyes were open, but they did not blink, did not focus, did not acknowledge his presence in any way. There was dried blood in her hair and on the side of her face, and when the headlights of a passing car illuminated her fully, Dale could see that the pattern of bruising across her chest and neck was consistent with someone who had been thrown against a steering wheel at tremendous force. He tried to stop her by stepping into her path, but she walked around him without pausing, without looking, without any indication that she had registered another human being was standing directly in front of her. Dale grabbed her arm and immediately let go because her skin was cold in a way that living skin should never be cold. It was the temperature of meat that had been sitting in a refrigerator. It was the temperature of something that no longer generated its own warmth. He stumbled backward and watched her continue walking, her bare feet leaving small, bloody prints on the pavement, and then he ran back to his truck and grabbed his phone and called 911 with hands that would not stop shaking. The dispatcher who took the call was a woman named Patricia Santos, who had worked for the county for 15 years and prided herself on remaining calm in any situation. She asked Dale to describe what he was seeing. She asked for his exact location. She asked if the woman appeared to be injured. Dale told her everything, his voice cracking as he explained that the woman would not respond, that her skin was ice cold, that she looked like she had been in a serious accident. Patricia ran a quick check on recent incidents in the area and found the report of the fatal crash on Dead Man's Bend less than an hour earlier. She pulled up the victim information. She looked at the name and description. She looked at the location Dale was calling from. She felt something cold crawl up her spine as the pieces connected in a way that should have been impossible. Patricia dispatched 2 patrol units to Dale's location while simultaneously calling St. Catherine's Hospital to confirm that Vanessa Cole had indeed been pronounced dead at 11:47 p.m., and that her body was currently in the morgue awaiting transport to the medical examiner's office. The hospital confirmed both facts. Patricia asked them to check again. They checked again and confirmed that the body bag containing Vanessa Cole was exactly where it was supposed to be. Patricia thanked them and hung up, and then sat very still at her desk for a long moment, trying to figure out how to explain to the responding officers what they were about to encounter. Officers Michael Chung and Rebecca Duarte were the first to arrive on scene. They found Dale Hendricks sitting in his truck with the doors locked and the engine running, pointing down the highway at a figure that was now nearly a quarter mile ahead, still walking with that same relentless mechanical pace. Michael and Rebecca exchanged a look that communicated more than words could express. They had both heard the dispatch call. They both knew what Patricia had found when she checked the records. They were both professional enough to approach the situation as if it were a standard welfare check, even though nothing about this situation was standard. Rebecca drove ahead while Michael stayed with Dale to take his statement. She pulled her patrol car onto the shoulder in front of the walking woman and activated her lights, hoping the flashing red and blue would get some kind of reaction. The woman did not stop. She did not slow down. She walked directly past the patrol car as if it were invisible, her eyes fixed on that distant point that only she could see. Rebecca got out and approached from behind, calling out in her most authoritative voice that she was a police officer and that she needed the woman to stop. The woman continued walking. Rebecca reached out and touched the woman's shoulder and immediately recoiled. The flesh beneath the thin hospital gown felt wrong in ways that Rebecca's mind refused to fully process. It was cold and stiff, and yet somehow still moving, still carrying this body forward on legs that should not have been functional. Rebecca circled around to look at the woman's face and felt her training evaporate in the face of what she was seeing. The woman's eyes were completely fixed and dilated. There was no pupillary response when Rebecca shined her flashlight directly into them. There was no breath fogging in the cold night air. There was no pulse visible in the neck. Rebecca was looking at a corpse that was walking along Highway 57 at 12:30 in the morning, and her rational mind simply could not reconcile what her senses were telling her. She called for backup. more units arrived. Eventually, there were 7 police vehicles lined up along the highway shoulder, their lights creating a strobing corridor of red and blue that the walking woman completely ignored. The officers tried everything they could think of to stop her. They tried verbal commands. They tried physically blocking her path. They tried gently restraining her, though none of them wanted to touch her for more than a few seconds because of how wrong her skin felt. Nothing worked. Vanessa Cole, or whatever Vanessa Cole had become, continued walking toward town with a determination that seemed to transcend conscious thought. Someone made the decision to call Thomas Cole and tell him what was happening, though no one could agree later on exactly who made that call or what exactly was said. Thomas arrived at the scene approximately 45 minutes after the first patrol units, still wearing the sweatpants he had been lounging in when he received the news that his wife was simultaneously dead at the hospital and walking along the highway 3 miles from where she had crashed. He pushed past the officers and ran toward the figure that was now approaching the town limits, calling her name, begging her to stop, to look at him, to acknowledge that he was there. Vanessa stopped walking. For the first time since Dale Hendricks had first spotted her, she stopped moving entirely. She stood perfectly still on the side of Highway 57, her bare feet planted on the gravel, her arms hanging at her sides, her head tilted slightly, as if she was listening to something no one else could hear. Thomas approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, his eyes streaming with tears that he did not bother to wipe away. He called her name again. He asked her if she could hear him. He told her that he loved her, that he did not understand what was happening, that he just wanted to take her home. Vanessa's head turned toward him. Her fixed, dilated eyes seemed to focus for the first time, though what they were seeing was impossible to know. Her cracked blue lips parted slightly. She spoke a single word in a voice that sounded like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. She said his name, Thomas. Just his name, nothing more, spoken in a voice that was hers and yet fundamentally not hers, as if the word was being pushed through vocal cords that no longer remembered how to form sounds. Thomas reached out and took her hand. The officers watching later reported that his face went white when their skin made contact, but he did not let go. He held her hand and looked into her dead eyes and asked her what happened, where she had been, how this was possible. Vanessa did not answer. She stood there holding her husband's hand for nearly 5 minutes without moving, without speaking again, without giving any further indication that she was aware of his presence. Then, without warning, she collapsed. The officers rushed forward. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her body against his chest, screaming for someone to help, to do something to save her. But there was nothing to save. Whatever animating force had been moving Vanessa Cole's body along Highway 57 had departed as suddenly as it had arrived. She was simply a corpse again, cold and stiff and empty, the same corpse that was supposedly still lying in a body bag at St. Catherine's Hospital, 3 miles away. The hospital was called again. They were asked to check the morgue immediately. The report that came back made no sense to anyone who heard it. The body bag that had contained Vanessa Cole was still there, still zipped closed, still exactly where it had been placed after she was pronounced dead. But when the attendant opened it to verify the contents, he found only the hospital gown she had been wearing when she died, and a thin layer of something that looked like gray ash coating the inside of the plastic. Thomas Cole sat on the side of Highway 57, holding his wife's body until the sun came up. The officers did not try to move him. The paramedics who arrived stood at a respectful distance, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. No one knew what to do. This was not covered in any training manual. There was no protocol for a woman who died in a car crash and was pronounced dead at a hospital, and then was seen walking along a highway 17 minutes later by multiple witnesses who all described the same impossible details. The official report filed after that night classified the incident as a case of mistaken identity combined with mass hysteria brought on by the stress of a fatal accident scene. No one who was actually there believes a word of that report. Dale Hendricks retired from trucking 3 weeks later and now refuses to drive at night under any circumstances. Officers Chun and Duarte have both been transferred to desk positions at their own request. Patricia Santos still works dispatch, but she has a tendency to hesitate now before running background checks on reported sightings, as if she is afraid of what she might find. Thomas Cole buried his wife for the second time on a Saturday morning in October, in a small private ceremony attended only by immediate family. He chose a cemetery on the opposite side of town from Highway 57, as far from Dead Man's Bend as he could get without leaving the county entirely. He visits her grave every Sunday, and sometimes when the wind is right, he swears he can hear footsteps approaching from the direction of the road. He never turns around to look. He does not want to know what he might see walking toward him across the grass. Highway 57 is still heavily traveled because it is the most direct route between the town and the interstate. But locals have noticed that traffic tends to thin out after midnight, especially in the stretch near Dead Man's Bend. Truckers who regularly drive that route have started taking alternate paths that add 30 minutes to their journey rather than pass through that particular section of road in the dark. Those who do travel Highway 57 at night report seeing things in their peripheral vision, figures standing on the shoulder that vanish when looked at directly, shapes moving parallel to the road just beyond the reach of headlights. Some people say it is just the power of suggestion, the inevitable result of a story that has grown in the telling until it has become local legend. Others who remember that night, who were there when a dead woman walked 3 miles along a dark highway to hear her husband call her name one final time, they know better. They know that death is not always the ending we assume it to be. They know that some people do not go quietly into whatever waits beyond the last breath. They know that love or desperation or some force that has no name in any human language can sometimes pull a soul back from the threshold long enough to take one last walk, to speak one last word, to hold one last hand before the darkness claims them forever. The death certificate for Vanessa Cole still lists her time of death as 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October. It does not mention the 17 minutes that followed. It does not mention the bloody footprints on the highway shoulder. It does not mention a single word spoken in a voice like crumbling paper. It does not mention any of the things that the authorities have decided the public does not need to know. But the truth has a way of surviving official silence. The truth lives in the memories of the witnesses, in the nightmares of the officers who responded, in the quiet grief of a husband who held his dead wife's hand on the side of a dark highway and heard her say his name one final time. If you ever find yourself driving on Highway 57 late at night, keep your eyes on the road ahead. Do not look at the shoulder. Do not stop if you see someone walking in your peripheral vision. Do not answer if someone speaks your name through your closed windows. Some journeys are not meant to be interrupted. Some travelers are not looking for a ride. They are just looking for something they lost, something they can never find again, walking endlessly toward a destination that exists only in the space between one heartbeat and the last.